Hi everyone, I'm Stefania Montero, teaching assistant 1 for group number 6, and this is our last lecture. Today I'll be doing a general overview of the main features of randomized clinical trials and compare them with observational studies. It is known that this type of study designs are substantially different, so why are we trying to compare them? And the reason why it's because as physicians, we know that the standard of care is constantly changing and it's evolving. It's a dynamic process, right? So how do we know what practices should we include in clinical settings and which ones are not necessarily very important for us? Here comes evidence-based medicine, right? So basically we are measuring the level of evidence based on the type of study. For example, at the bottom of the pyramid, we can see basic science studies with laboratory studies in animals. And you may ask, yes, they're important, they're essential, we do need them, but in the clinical setting, will this make a difference in the treatment of the patient, in the prognosis, or in their care? The answer is not very likely. It needs to evolve, it needs to grow into something that we can actually measure their effect on their patient. Following the same line, we can see that observational studies are a little bit heavier, and then we can have randomized controlled trials, and on top of that, we have meta-analysis and systematic reviews. And the reason why they're on the top of the pyramid is because they can analyze a pooled data set and give you accurate conclusions with a more robust data. So we already know that a randomized clinical trial is the gold standard for assessing the efficacy of any new intervention. And the reason why it's because of the randomization itself, which is basically a process that assigns the participants to either treatment or control group, assuming that each participant or each subject has the same chance of being in either group. It's very simple, the concept. And thanks to that, we will have the biggest strength of an RCT, which is balanced group. And this means that in your population, the difference observed are going to be most likely due to the intervention itself rather than due to the difference between the baseline features between groups. This will lead you to a prevention in biases and a high internal validity. However, you need to be very mindful that it is a process. And in order to have a successful randomization process, you need to ensure an allocation sequence, which is going to be very related to randomization methods, whether it's simple or block or stratified. At the end of the day, the key feature is that the allocation concealment is essential because it's going to make this sequence unpredictable. The special considerations for a randomized clinical trial involves applicability and ethical limitations. So in the case of applicability, we aim to control every possible variable in a randomized controlled clinical trial. However, this is not necessarily a resemblance of the daily life of a patient. Therefore, we can see how applicable is this in an environment that is not controlled. And of course, ethical limitations, we have already had extensive discussions in previous lectures. Now, if we compare with observational studies, we can say that we have all kinds of colors, depending on what you want to measure, whether it's incidence or prevalence or exposure or risk factors. You will have a specific type of observational study, and you will choose between a cohort or case control or cross-sectional. But keep in mind that the main feature of this is that number one, they are the best option when a randomized clinical trial is not possible. And number two, we'll assess the exposure and there won't be any manipulation of the intervention. So you will be an observer and you will take note and measure what you're watching. That's it. And because of that, it is a more affordable study design, and of course the ethical considerations are not an issue on this case. However, the biggest disadvantage of these kind of studies is the lack of randomization. And again, this will lead us to a terrible, terrible situation, which is going to be the possible introduction of biases and confounding variables. And why is this so terrible? Well, it's because if your study is biased, you're done. There is no way you can fix a bias. But if you have confounding variables, you can adjust for them and still have a very robust data set and a study. So this is the main thing that you need to keep in mind when you're going to analyze or when you're going to assess any kind of observational study. And a common question at this point is, which one is better, this or that? And the answer is quite simple. It depends. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but yeah, this is a real answer. It depends because a study design is going to be tailored to your needs. It's going to be tailored to the gap that you want to study. It's going to be tailored to your research question or to your resources or your sample population. And that's the main takeaway that I want you to get from this lecture. It's always going to depend, and you need to adapt to the scenario that you are currently at. So we made it to the end. Congrats for staying for this video. Congrats for finishing the PPCR, and thank you very much, and have a good one. Take care.